Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 15th Annual Oklahoma Transition Institute. We are doing it virtually this year. We're so excited to have all of you here with us this afternoon. This is day one of 3 days of virtual events, and it's exciting to know that we're in our 15th year of being able to provide this institute. Not ideally doing it virtual, but excited to be able to offer something rather than nothing. We would absolutely prefer to be in person with all of you and are thankful to have you here with us. I'm Kim Osmani. I am chair of the Oklahoma Transition Council, and I am going to run through some information with you today to help you navigate the Zoom platform. So just a few tips to help you. Just to let everybody know, this training is being recorded, and we will have the recorded presentations, the PowerPoints, and any other materials, including the transcripts, available a week or two after the event for anyone who's registered to view, as well as others. So please be sure to let your colleagues and families who were unable to participate know that they will have access to that information. So we do have closed captioning today, and there are two ways that you can view it. One is to choose at the bottom, well, depending on where your Zoom bar is, there's a black Zoom bar with your different controls, and there's a closed caption icon with the CC and the words closed caption. If you click on that, you can select for closed caption to be turned on. You can either show it as a subtitle, which only shows tidbits of what they type as they go, or you can view more lines of the full transcript by viewing or selecting view full transcript. I do want to let you know that if you choose the view full transcript, it looks like the chat and it actually replaces it. So if you're going to want to type into the chat, you'll probably, you need to click out of it into the chat and then go back to view full transcript. You can also go onto your Zoom bar and you'll see the word more with 3 dots above it. If you click on that, you can select closed caption from there as well. And as you can see on the picture on the bottom right, it gives you an example of what the subtitles look like. And you'll see a notification on your screen when it is on. Additionally, if you want to adjust the size of the captioning, because it's set at a standard setting, you can click on the arrow next to start your video. And if you choose video settings, there's actually a slider that you can move. You can also click on the word accessibility and do the same thing. So you can navigate how big or how small you would like for that closed captioning to be. We also have our wonderful interpreters here today. And to ensure that they stay visible on your screen, you can actually see their videos in 2 different ways. You can hover over the video of the interpreters, and if you notice, both interpreters have an asterisk in front of their name, and they should appear at the top of your screen as ASL Interpreter Renee or ASL Interpreter Jerry. And if you hover over their videos, you can actually click on the 3 dots and choose pin video, or you can go to the participant list, click on more next to their names, and then you can pin the video there as well. We gave you some example screenshots on the slide to help you with those navigations. Please make sure that your computer or headphone speakers are turned on and the volume's adjusted to your preference. We have muted everybody except for the presenters today, intentionally. But if there's time for Q&A at the end, Renee may ask you to unmute if you want to ask a question or post it in the chat. And when you are going to unmute, if you're using a PC, a shortcut, if you're like me, sometimes I'm like, where's that darn microphone on my screen? I can't get to unmute. If you just use Alt-A, that will unmute you, and you can hit Alt-A to mute you. And if you're a Mac user, it's Shift-Option-A. We've also if you want to have your video on, that's entirely up to you. If you tend to have bandwidth issues, then you might consider turning your video off. We found as we do presentations that helps sometimes. If you happen to see the icon that has like the red line through it, that means that your microphone and or video are muted or off. And so you'll want to make sure that they're on if you do want to speak. Excuse me. We would love to see lots of activity taking place in the chat box today. And so please do click in that chat box if you have questions or comments, and especially if you have any technical assistance or you have technical assistance needs with navigating Zoom. You can choose a specific individual to message. You can message the panelists, or you can send it to everybody. You're also in control of your viewing experience in Zoom. So some recommendations are that you can exit full screen mode if you don't want it showing up over your entire screen. And you'll go to the top right or to view options in your drop-down menu to exit full screen. I sometimes just click onto that monitor and hit escape, and that works for me as well. You can enable what we call side-by-side mode, where you see the PowerPoint on the left and the presenter on the right. When you go to view options in the drop-down menu. You can click on speaker view if you only want to see the current presenter, which Renee will be the only presenter today. Or you can click on gallery view if you want to see the videos of everybody who's on that might happen to have their video on, or a picture of themselves, or even just their name showing. And you can click on the chat after you exit full screen mode to pin the chat to the right side of your screen if you want to do that also. So like I mentioned before, please do use the chat. We want to encourage you guys to do that so that Renee can address your answers or address your questions. And my email is kosmani@cornell.edu. If you have additional technical assistance questions with Zoom, please email me. If for some reason you're not in Zoom anymore and can't put it in the chat, you can email me and I'll try to help you the best that I can. Lots of questions about certificates and CEUs. So once we finish day 3 on September 30th, we will send an email to everybody who registered, and it will have the link where you can complete your online evaluation. Once you complete the online evaluation, your message will pop up on the screen, and it will allow you in that message to download the certificates, to print them, whatever you want to do with them. Also on that screen is a message that if you're going to request for VR staff CRC credits, you need to take a screenshot of that message that comes up as soon as you submit your evaluation, and send that screenshot along with your daily certificates and the list of sessions you attended to Lashara Thomas at lthomas@okdrs.gov. For everyone else, you'll be able to download and or print your certificates for each day after you submit the evaluation. We are so thankful to the sponsors that we have for this year's Transition Institute, the Oklahoma Department of Rehabilitation Services, Oklahoma Able Tech, the Oklahoma Family Network, the Oklahoma Development and Transition, and Pathways Adult Learning Center. If you've joined us for some of our sessions already today, you've gotten to hear from some of our sponsors, and you will be able to hear from more of them throughout the next 2 days. If you want to get more information about the Transition Council or upcoming events, or even see past presentations from all the years of OTI, we have so much information, as well as our newsletter, our electronic newsletter. We have our QR code included here for you, as well as a link to the Zero Center, which houses our information. And you can also follow us on Facebook. So if you're not familiar with how to do a QR code and you have a smartphone, if you literally just open your phone and just go to your camera and aim your phone at that QR code, a little message will pop up on your phone asking you if you want to open that link. So it's a really quick way to get to our information. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to today's presenter, Renee Damon.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get the presentation up. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all this afternoon and to share and discuss a topic that I know we get lots of questions about here at the Autism Network, and that I know a lot of you have encountered in your work through just supporting youth, whether that's through your work supporting youth in a work or pre-employment environment, whether you're supporting youth as a parent or caregiver, or someone who's supporting a youth in the home or community setting. And then I know a lot of you on here may also be working in a school-based environment. And so I can give some examples and things related to that as we talk. My experience is I've worked in developmental disabilities for a really long time, early on, primarily as a pediatric physical therapist in a variety of settings. And then I've been here at the university for 21 years. And since 2003, my time has been as a director of the Oklahoma Autism Network. I spend part of my time now obviously doing all the tasks related to the Oklahoma Autism Network, which includes training, professional development, working with families, coordinating the statewide autism conference and other various things. And then I also spend a portion of my time consulting in the schools and supporting teachers that have students with autism in their classrooms. So as we go through this presentation, I know one of the things we've all become accustomed to since March is Zoom trainings, right? Zoom training, Zoom meetings, Zoom everything. We're all probably wishing we'd invested in Zoom prior to COVID. So as we go through this, as Kim was saying, if you have a question, if you want to, as we're going along, if you have a question about the specific area we're talking about at that moment, if you want to just type it into the chat. As we get some questions, Ginger Wells, who works with us, will be making me aware that there are some questions in there that we can stop and talk about as we're going along. And then I will also leave time at the end for us to talk about any questions. So either way, however it works better for you to ask your question is fine with me. And then, you know, the goal is for this to be as relevant and meaningful for you in whichever environment you're working in as possible. So you can ask your questions that way through the chat as we're going along or towards the end. We will do that as well. And then if there is a more individualized question you have based on your own child or a student you're supporting or someone you're supporting in a work environment, then you can also email me if you'd like. And I don't have my email included on here specifically, but at the end, there is a contact slide where you can just email us at the network and that will get directly to me through Ginger. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So our objectives for today are to talk a little bit about some of those critical skills that we know are important for individuals with developmental disabilities, including autism, intellectual disability, any developmental disability overall, to decrease the likelihood of us seeing problem behavior in that individual as they grow and get older. We're going to talk about potential functions of problem behavior. We're going to talk about a behavioral framework and kind of a way of breaking things down to really gather information to better understand why a behavior is occurring so that you can develop an effective support plan for that individual. And we're going to also talk about some basic strategies based on the hypothesized function of a problem behavior, ways that you can look at addressing that regardless of the setting that you're in. I want to start by talking just a little bit about a research article that came out in 2019 that really, I know for us, we've been talking a lot about it through the network. We're actually developing some toolkits for families and professionals to use related to these 4 areas, because this article was kind of like a wow, duh, I bet at the same time, just so powerful thinking about these 4 key areas that we know that if we are adequately teaching skills and addressing these areas for individuals with developmental disabilities, then they are less likely to be in a situation where they're going to be engaging in significant problem behavior that's going to interfere with their ability to participate in those meaningful daily activities. This article was written by actually somebody who, one of the primary authors was somebody we know well that we've worked a lot with through the network, Shala Alarazales, who is actually at the University of North Texas. And it's looking at these 4 key areas of communication, gaining attention, engaging in play and leisure, and coping skills. And I want to start out by just briefly talking about these areas, because as we think about them, I would argue that whether you're working with preschoolers or whether you're working with young adults. And whether you're working with somebody with mild disabilities or more significant disabilities, we primarily work with individuals with autism. So we're thinking, we know autism is a spectrum. So we are working with individuals with a wide range of skill level. These 4 areas apply. And they should really be, I would argue, goals that are considered for anyone who's on an IEP at some level. If somebody has difficulties in these areas, we should be thinking about how we're supporting development of skills in these areas when we're talking about, creating opportunities for people to be as independent as possible in employment, in living just as an adult in our community. So these 4 areas, and as I talk about them, if it's something you want to gain more information about, feel free to contact me. But these key skills to teach in these 4 areas, the way they define these is, the first one is thinking about, can the individual that I'm supporting safely, effectively, and respectfully communicate their wants, needs, likes, and dislikes in ways that are understood by others and do not result in harm to others, to self or others? So when you think about that, that's a really broad skill set, but probably if you kind of think about whether it's your family member that you're listening to this for, or whether it's individuals that you support through your work, you can probably think about a variety of people and think about different things that we need, different skill areas that we could be addressing under this. The second one is, can the individual safely, effectively, and pleasantly gain the attention and affection of others in ways that are understood by others and do not offend or hurt others? So again, here, a wide range of skills that an individual needs. And when you talk about do not offend others, that brings up a whole nother element, thinking about the environment the person's in, the age of the person, what's expected based on their age, and whether or not they're in a work environment, a home environment, an environment or setting in the community, and what that might look like. Does the person joyfully engage in activities alone and with others that increase in number, duration, and complexity and do not cause harm to self or others? So when you're talking about young children, this is where we might be thinking about play-related skills, but this is also an important area when we're thinking about the youth that we're working with and young adults. Do those youth and young adults that we're supporting have meaningful ways of occupying their time in a way that occupies their time in a way they enjoy, that is safe for them, that's safe for the people that are around them? And how are we expanding that if we're working with somebody who has a very narrow range of ways that they are able to occupy their time? And then the last one is thinking about safely, effectively, and diplomatically coping with, tolerating, and accommodating adversity in situations that are in the child's best interests over the long term. So when I think about some of the individuals we serve, this is where we're thinking about things like coping with going into different environments, coping with and tolerating self-care related things that we know are important for that person's health long term. But I know when we're thinking about supporting people to work in a community-based environment, we also have to think about things like hygiene. Is that person able to tolerate the various hygiene activities that are needed in order for them to have opportunities to go work in the community, or in order for other people to be interested in being around them, those types of things. But this also comes into thinking about medical, tolerating things related to that person's medical care that they're going to need. And sometimes we're able to, kind of think, oh, well, he's little, he might just not be able to tolerate whether it's having his hair cut or going to the dentist and having his teeth cleaned. But how are we systematically addressing, supporting that person to become more successful in tolerating those things, knowing that over the long term for that individual, they're going to have to be able to tolerate those things to get the care that they need to be healthy and have overall good health. So I wanted to bring this up at the beginning because we are talking about challenging behavior, and because the research and this article is talking about basically wrapping these 4 areas into what research tells us, that if individuals have significant difficulty in any of these 4 areas or multiple of these 4 areas, they are more likely to have problem behavior that interferes with the opportunities they have. And I can tell you that, you know, we get called in a lot to support individuals who have challenging behavior, and 100% of the time, I can say that the individuals that we're called in to support have difficulty in one, typically multiple of these areas, and sometimes pretty significant difficulty in these areas. So I guess wanted to present this to you to implore upon you to really think about how are we supporting people to gain skills in these areas to decrease the likelihood of that challenging behavior as they grow and develop. So another thing I want to talk about is kind of thinking about some of the skills that individuals are expected to have across different environments. And obviously this is going to look different depending on the age of the person you're supporting, their skill level based on their disability and opportunities they've had to develop skills over time. But in general, when we think about employment, we know students are often expected to have some level of academic knowledge and some literacy skills. And even for those who don't have literacy skills, I think there are ways that we can accommodate and support them to understand what tasks are expected of them in a work environment. But when you think about non-academic skills, sometimes I think these are almost some of the more important as it relates to the four things I just talked about. But also thinking about that self-efficacy, that self-management, ability to manage one's own behavior as independently as possible, or manage one's own skills and needs as independently as possible, which obviously opens up more opportunities for employment in a wider range of settings with less support. Maybe the ability to be involved in goal setting, and that, again, what that looks like, it can vary significantly for the individual. And then some social behavioral skills. So that ability to be around other people, adapt to whatever that setting is, or with some support, be able to have the necessary social skills to function in whatever the setting might be. And this is based on the references that I've included below. So when we think about social behavioral skills, it's some level of professionalism. And again, what that looks like is going to depend on the individual. Some work ethic or ability to persist and stay engaged in a work activity. Some level of oral and written communication. Now, again, what that looks like, because a lot of the individuals I serve may not have effective verbal communication, but we given them another means of communicating effectively with other people, whether that's through a voice output device or pictures or sign language. You know, we've got to have some way that person is able to communicate with other people. Ability to work around or be around others, teamwork and collaboration, critical thinking or some level of problem solving skills, and that social responsibility to others. And again, these are things that are cited that when individuals do have difficulty in these areas, they're the most frequent reasons that youth with disabilities are unable to obtain or maintain employment, is often due to inappropriate social behavior. And I can say, working primarily with individuals with autism, I can say that I've often seen, even if you have an individual who has average, above average IQ and lots of knowledge, lots of academic knowledge and skills, if they aren't able to work together with others in settings, then it can really be a barrier to them being as successful as they have the ability to be. And then when we think about those skills expected in a home environment, I just included a few things that I think we have to be thinking about when we're thinking about helping people be as independent as possible. Again, I get down to this, having an ability to occupy oneself in an appropriate way, because that, for individual families that we support, sometimes when a person doesn't have a way of occupying themselves in a meaningful way, it can really lead to some challenges and an increased likelihood of challenging behavior. And when we think about skills in the community, I think, you know, being as independent as possible and understanding the expectations of the environment that you're in. So understanding that the expectations of me in going to the grocery store might look very different than the expectations of me when I'm going into another person's home to visit for a get-together or something. And I think one of the things we've seen through families that we support and things have heard about is obviously. Social expectations are even different now in the past 6 months than they've ever been in our history, right? So when you go out in the community now, there's a whole nother set of kind of social rules and expectations related to understanding social distancing, understanding keeping space between you and other people, the ability to tolerate wearing a mask. For a lot of the individuals that we serve, those have become yet another set of barriers to people being able to go out and be part of the community if you can't tolerate wearing a mask or you don't have a concept or understanding of social distancing. So these are all skills that I just mentioned because those are things we want to be thinking about as we're supporting people on how are we helping them develop skills in these areas so that they have as much opportunity as possible to be part of the community, to hopefully be employed in the community in some way, or be engaged, even if it's not through employment, in some kind of daily activities that are meaningful to that person and to the people that are important to them. So the next part of this presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through just a framework for when we're thinking about an individual who has challenging behavior. And when I talk about challenging behavior and using this framework, I'm really thinking about someone who has a significant enough challenging behavior that's happening consistently enough at a frequency and intensity that it's really interfering with that person's ability to participate and be part of activities that they would otherwise be part of based on their age, based on what their peers are doing, or that it's also potentially really contributing to difficulty in caring for that person. So it's really causing challenges for primary caregivers, educators, job coaches, other people who are working with and supporting those people or supporting that individual. So just to start off, the framework we're going to talk about today is based on the science of applied behavior analysis. ABA is another thing you probably have heard it more frequently referenced as ABA. But ABA is just a scientific approach for discovering environmental variables that reliably influence socially significant behavior and for developing a technology of behavior change that's practical and applicable. And so basically it just means we're looking at behavior, we're looking at the environment, we're looking at the context, and we're looking at those factors that are contributing to that behavior and thinking about how we can manipulate those things in order to change the behavior in a more, and change the behavior to make it more socially appropriate, make it more effective for that person so that they have the opportunities that they want to have. I just want to briefly say, when we think about behavior and what makes behavior measurable, the behaviors that we're concerned about are things that we can see. So things that we can observe with the naked eye, that we can see, so that we can measure them, so that we can know whether or not the plans that we're developing and the supports we're providing for that person are working or not and making a difference. And it's, one of the definitions in the behavioral field is like something that can only be done by living organisms. So we're concerned with behavior that's socially significant, that's observable, and something that we can see. So what makes a behavior socially significant? That's really going to be at some level, it's very individualized. It's those things that improve the day-to-day life experience of the person, or as I was saying earlier, or affect their significant others in a way that they behave more positively with and towards the participant. So again, this is very context-based. So if a person has a challenging behavior or a problem behavior, say that their problem behavior is aggression towards others. So when they get upset, they maybe hit, pinch, headbutt other people. That's going to obviously limit that person's day-to-day life opportunities. And it's obviously going to significantly affect anyone who's responsible for caring for that person. We obviously want to make a change in that behavior so that person has more opportunities to engage in meaningful day-to-day activities, and so that we also lessen the burden on those people who are caring for that person. But sometimes the behavior is not as significant in the sense that it's not causing harm to the individual or to other people, but it can still be a problem in the sense that maybe it's influencing how peers think about that person. So for example, thinking about some of the individuals I've worked with who have maybe milder characteristics of autism, have a lot of verbal skills, but maybe don't know how to deal with their frustration. And when they get upset in the classroom or at the workplace, they start yelling. They maybe call other people names because they don't have other ways of dealing with their frustration. That's still going to have, likely, most of us are probably not going to respond positively to somebody calling us names and yelling at us, can impact how other people perceive that person. It might influence how many people are willing to work with that person, or how many kids, if that student is in a classroom setting, are interested in playing with that child on the playground at recess. So, I mean, a problem behavior can look all different kinds of ways, and it can, when you define socially significant, you really have to kind of come back to this definition, think about the context where the person spends their time, and how those behaviors might be negatively impacting the opportunities that person has and how other people perceive that person. So one of the key things, and most of you guys are probably familiar with this concept, that, you know, we know behavior happens for a reason. When a person is engaging in problem behavior, we don't want to, you know, our first response is not to blame the person, but to think about, okay, what's going on? You know, what's going on, and why is this person engaging this behavior? And how can we help them learn other ways of accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish? So we have to always remember that behavior is communication. When I'm working with teachers and other support staff, saying, you know, if there's a problem behavior occurring, this is this child's best effort in this moment, given these circumstances, to communicate what they're trying to communicate to us. So that's where we have to kind of put our investigator hat on and try and really figure out what's going on here and why is this going on. So when we think about the function or why behavior is happening, it is going to fall into one of 4 categories. So typically behavior is happening either for attention, so that person is trying to gain the attention of other people, and maybe this is the most effective way they've figured out to do that. They're engaging in that behavior to escape or avoid a task or a demand, or maybe something in the environment that's overwhelming to them. They're engaging in that behavior to get something tangible, you know, if they're trying to gain access to something. And then the 4th category we look at is automatic reinforcement. And automatic reinforcement are things like, you know, all of us have different little habits we engage in for automatic reinforcement. Maybe you like to twirl your hair, maybe you like to chew on your pencil, maybe you like to, when you get off work, sing in the car by yourself because you just enjoy that. So there's lots of different behaviors that fall into this category of automatic reinforcement. But when you see a person engaging in problem behavior, the thing we want to ask is, okay, what are they getting out of this? Why are they doing this? And what are they trying to accomplish? And trying to determine which of these 4 categories it falls into.
So Renee?
Yep.
We have a question in the chat from Nadine. Isn't it important to address and have specific behavior goals in the IEP?
Okay, so did she say, is it or isn't it?
Isn't it important to address and have specific behavior goals in the IEP?
I would say overall, probably yes. For individuals with developmental disabilities, you're going to have, if a person has problem behavior that's occurring on a regular basis, then you may have to go to the next step of actually having an FBA conducted, like we're going to talk about here in a minute. But in general, I think having behavior goals, especially that probably fall under those 4 categories I mentioned at the beginning, is really important, because it shows how we are consistently trying to develop skills that are going to help that person be less likely to engage in problem behavior. Did I answer your question? I can't see the chat, so I don't know why. Did that answer the question? If it didn't, Nadine, please let us know. But I do think it's important, as you said, to have these goals in the IEP. I mean, it's also an accountability when you have it in the IEP, and it shows that that you guys are addressing behavior in a very intentional way. So when we're thinking about, and again, this framework is something that you guys are probably all familiar with, but I think it's just, when we're looking and observing behavior, we're looking at three primary things. We're looking at those antecedents, or those triggers, which is what happens right before the behavior that we're focused on. We're looking at the behavior, or what the person does, described in an objective way that paints a picture basically of that behavior, and we're looking at the consequence, or what happens immediately after the behavior. So this three-term contingency in a table format is looking at, this example of the antecedent, or the trigger, being Joey is asked to help a customer that entered the store, and a colleague verbally prompts him to do so. So you can see that you can kind of get a picture in your head. Joey's working in a store, he's working on his customer service skills, and his colleague or coworker said, hey, you might want to go ask that customer for help. So then the behavior is that Joey ignores the colleague's request and walks away from the customer to the back of the store. The consequence, or what happens immediately after that behavior, is that Joey gets alone time in the break room, and then the colleague goes ahead and helps the customer. So anybody have a thought based on this that you can just type into the chat about a potential function of Joey's behavior? Thinking about the four categories that you have. There's a lot of you on here. I bet one of you can type an answer. It's okay if it's not right.
Yes, so we have quite a few popping up. So we have
Okay.
to get time alone in the break room, to avoid, avoidance, escape, avoid, communication,
Yep.
to avoid
Okay.
relating to a customer, to get time alone in the break room.
Absolutely. So I would say, as you guys were pointing out, that I think in this case, the most likely function of that behavior is escape or avoid. And then he does get something tangible out of it. He gets time alone in the break room. I'd say the primary function is probably escape or avoid. In which case, in this scenario, I'd be thinking, okay, what is it about asking a customer for help that is causing him to leave the situation? So do we need to be working on some more skill development for him so that he feels more comfortable? Do we need to practice more, do some role playing around asking customers for help? Maybe trying a little bit of that, seeing if that works to support him where he feels more confident in doing that. But absolutely escape, avoid, I would say would be the primary function of that. So what you want to think about is, if you're starting to see an individual acting a certain way more often, typically what that means is that whatever is happening right after that behavior is reinforcing that behavior. Because if the person's not getting something out of it, they're not going to keep doing it. And reinforcement is whatever happens immediately after a behavior that makes it more likely that that person engages in that behavior in the future. So when we think about different types of reinforcement, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I do want to just kind of have you think about reinforcement in two separate ways. There's positive reinforcement, where something is added to, or the person gets something out of that, like might be a sensory or biological thing. Like when we think about singing in the car, maybe you like to hear yourself sing, or when you're twirling your hair, you like the way it feels and it makes you kind of feel calm. Or the person's getting maybe attention or praise, or access to something like a favorite, their favorite food, or their favorite music, or something that they like. Negative reinforcements when we're removing something. So for example, in the case of our example that we just had here, this is a form of negative reinforcement because he leaves. So he just had social negative reinforcement, where he escaped that attention and that social demand of that situation by leaving and going to the break room. So really the main thing just to remember here is that if you're seeing a behavior occurring over and over again, something is reinforcing that behavior. And we've got to look at what those consequences are that are following that behavior and see, okay, what is the person getting out of this? Because that's going to give you some important information for thinking about how you're going to change what you're doing to support them. So we're going to just talk, like you guys see my people on here, don't you? I can probably hide that. Whoa. Sorry, I'm trying to move this stuff out of your way so you can see this. So there's a lot of text here, so I'm just going to focus on some key things, but there is like a little scenario that we're going to walk through as we go through this, thinking about Maddie, who's a 16-year-old who is in a work-based learning experience. She's working at a movie theater twice a week for 2 hours, cleaning the theater at the end of each movie. I mean, I think it is important to know when you're thinking about best practice, they determined that this was a good setting for her because she has an interest in movies and she wants to work at a movie theater when she gets out of school. But the problem behavior or the challenge that they're having is that Maddie frequently is off task. So she's not doing her work tasks because she's talking on her cell phone or she's talking to her coworkers. When she's talking to her coworkers, she's also distracting her coworkers. So not only is Maddie not getting her work done, her coworkers aren't getting their work done. And the movie theater manager, he has developed an incentive for all employees and has worked to reinforce Maddie's on-task behavior, but it's not working. Maddie is continuing to be off task. And I think this is, when you're thinking about a problem behavior, often I think the first thing you might want to think about is, do we have all kind of the general supports in place that we know this person needs? Are we using evidence-based supports and interventions to support this person? So like, for example, if I get called to come into a classroom because of a behavior concern of a student, I don't go straight to doing a functional behavior assessment. The first thing I do is look around at what's happening, observe the student, and see, is there something we can tweak or adjust that may solve the problem? So like in this case, the movie theater manager probably has some kind of standardized incentive system that has worked for most other employees that he's using. So he starts with kind of his first line of defense, but that's not enough. It doesn't solve the problem. So then at that point, what you want to do is start thinking about, okay, we might need to do something a little more intensively to address the need here. So I'm going to just talk through this because I do want to make sure we get through everything and leave time for questions. But when you think about, in this case, the antecedent or the trigger, it's when she is working in the theater and she's supposed to be cleaning the theater, and her the behavior is that she is off task, and you can just say off task, but that's not going to describe to people what's going on. So you want to be specific and say Maddie's talking on her cell phone and talking to her coworkers and not completing her work. And the response that she's probably getting out of that, when you look at the consequence, although it's not included in here, but it's probably that she's getting to talk to her friends, she's getting to talk to whoever she's called on the phone, and she's escaping the work task. The thing that is important to remember, and I just again want us to always think about, is we have to understand the function of the behavior in order to develop an effective plan. So as I was saying just a minute ago, I think when you come into a situation, the first question to ask is, are the supports that we know this person needs in place? The supports they need in order to be successful? Or are there components that are missing? Start there. If there are missing components, then let's get all the supports in place that we know this person needs and see if the behavior continues. If the behavior continues, then you've got to be a little bit more systematic and you've got to go, okay, what is this person trying to accomplish by engaging in this behavior? And we've got to gather and go through this process we're getting ready to talk about some information in a consistent and systematic way to really understand what the function of the behavior is. Because otherwise what's going to happen is we're going to kind of keep like this target right here, shooting arrows at it, throwing out ideas. Well, have you tried this? Well, what about this? What if we modify this? But we're not going to necessarily see anything change because we may be missing our target because we don't completely understand the function of the behavior and all the contributing factors. So when we think about, like in this situation with Maddie, you know, what identifying the goals and priorities, we can ask, like, what is it that we think she's attempting to communicate? Well, she obviously values attention from her peers, whether she's talking to them in person or talking to them on the phone. And we have to think about what behavior do we want to see more of? Well, we want to see her completing her required tasks at her job. We want to see her staying on task and following instruction. And we want to see her also being a good coworker, team member, and helping her coworkers voluntarily without being asked. What do we want to see less of? We want to see less of her talking on her phone while she's at work and less disruption of her coworkers. So in order to go through this functional behavior assessment process, what we're going to do is, you know, first talking about what a functional assessment is. It is a process for developing an understanding of a person's problem behavior, and in particular, how that behavior is governed by environmental events. It includes multiple components. One is the indirect assessment, where we're gathering information from relevant people. Who those people are is based on the setting, but we're gathering information by interviewing and talking with those people. We can use questionnaires and other tools, or just some kind of structured questionnaire to gather that information. And then the descriptive assessment component is when we are observing the individual and gathering that information in a systematic way. I've included a few links on here for some tools that can assist in indirect assessment. I'm not going to be able to go through each of those right now, but there are some tools on here that are just a resource for you. And if you have questions about those, you can feel free to email me, and I'm happy to help you with that. So the next step that they completed in this process was that they did complete an ecological assessment. They talked to Maddie, so the young lady that we're focusing on here, and she was able to identify her strengths, that she shows up on time, she gets along with coworkers, and she does have some, you know, she identified her weaknesses too. So she talked about learning to communicate her wants and needs appropriately, doing more interesting tasks, and staying engaged on the job. So she's giving us some clues to the fact that she has some self-awareness of what some of her challenges are and some of the things that she needs. So through some observation and things, we found that her problem behavior does occur more when coworkers are present. So their first solution to this was for her to work more independently with support from Elizabeth and not having her coworkers present. But what they found, so this is where you can kind of hit and miss sometimes if you haven't gathered all the information you need, is that removing the coworkers didn't decrease her problem behavior, but it increased the amount of time she spent off task on her phone. So that first thing didn't solve the problem. So they needed to go to gathering more information. So this is where you can think about how you're going to gather that information through the target routines and settings. And then you're going to look at correlations between things that predict the behavior or happen most likely before that behavior. So whenever, if you are going through this process, you know, one of the key questions I always ask is, when is the behavior more likely to happen? Because unless you have the freedom to go and watch somebody for hours on end, you obviously want to maximize the time that you're observing the person who has a challenging behavior. So when I'm working with teachers or other or family members or things, if they can gather a little bit of information ahead of time, if they're not aware when the behavior is happening more often, you can share like a little data sheet with them or something where they just kind of start paying attention to, oh, you know what? It's happening more in math class, or it's happening more in the morning than it does at the end of the day. And that kind of narrows down the parameters around when you need to go and spend time observing that person in those target routines and settings. Obviously for Maddie, the best time for us to be there is when she's doing her work, cleaning the theater. I've included just a few examples of sheets that you can use to gather the data. So this is just a chart that the person gathering the data is going to fill in. It's important that if you if you are working with a team to develop this process, to gather information, that everybody's on the same page about how to fill out the different parts of this form, and that people that know that when you talk about the behavior that you need it to be in a descriptive way, that they're providing that information versus just saying, you know, Maddie got mad or Maddie was off task. Okay, that doesn't tell me very much. You need people to be descriptive. And then this is just another example of another way that you can gather information. Sometimes when you have a checklist, it makes it easier to do that. Like I have a situation where I've done an observation and I'm making an individualized checklist based on what I've observed so that it's super easy for the adults to gather some additional data to help me better understand what's going on. So then for the next example here, you know, what we're seeing is they gathered more information through direct observation to try and get an understanding of why she's doing this. And they suggest that what they're finding is that when she's asked to complete an easier non-preferred task, she's more likely to become off task by using her cell phone or talking to coworkers to get attention. It's also determined that it's more likely to occur when she was previously reprimanded by a supervisor or had little sleep the night before. So now we're getting a little more insight, into like setting events or things that make it more likely for her to have that problem behavior. So once they've kind of figured those things out, then her job coach planned to teach her an alternative behavior, giving her a replacement skill, teaching her how she can ask for more challenging tasks if she's bored because the task is too easy, and also a way that she can ask for feedback on her job performance that's more socially appropriate, and a more appropriate way for her to gather or gain attention. I want to show you real quickly. Did you guys see, did my screen change? This is another way of, this is the actual article that this scenario came out of. Ginger, if anybody says I can't see my screen, will you please let me know? But
I sure will.
Huh?
I will.
Thank you. So this is just a way that they have put the information that they gathered into kind of this flow chart. This is something that we use for some of these purposes as well, thinking about, you know, setting events that make it more likely that that behavior is going to occur. So like for Maddie, they found that if the employer reprimands her, she hasn't had a lot of sleep the night before, it's more likely that she might have this off-task behavior. And then they found the triggers that when she's doing a simple or non-preferred task, she's more likely to have the problem behavior. The current behavior is that she becomes off task by talking to her peers or using her cell phone. The current alternative that they're working towards is teaching her to appropriately request more challenging tasks or to get feedback. And then the consequence is in order to obtain attention from adults and peers. So we're wanting to get away from this behavior that's not working. It's interfering with her being successful in the work environment. We're going to work on teaching her this alternative, more socially appropriate way of accomplishing what she's trying to accomplish. But then we're going to reinforce this alternative behavior by giving her praise and attention that she's seeking. Our ultimate goal is that she will be able to work on time and without redirection. And then she's going to still be getting that praise and attention from her employer and peers. One thing we like about using these kind of flow charts is it's a super easy way for everybody on the team to kind of see where we are here, what our current skills that we're working on teaching, and what our long-term goal is with that desired behavior. And then it also here is another way that you can include some of that additional information that makes it easy for everybody to see what those prevention strategies are, what the behavioral supports and strategies are, and what the consequence strategies are so that everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to go through some general strategies to think about. So if you've gone through this process, you've identified the function of the problem behavior, and then you're trying to develop a behavior support plan. Whenever a person has a behavior support plan, that behavior support plan should be directly tied to the identified function of the problem behavior. And you should be thinking about supports in 3 specific areas. Any comprehensive behavior support plan should have prevention strategies included. Oops, I've got to share my screen that way there. There. We should also be teaching new, more socially appropriate skills. This is one of the areas that I think if there's an area of a support plan that gets left off, sometimes I feel like it's this middle part. You know, we've got to teach kids more appropriate skills. And then we want to think about how we as the adults are changing our response. And just remembering that whatever strategies we choose should be based on the data, and they have to be individualized for that person and for the context where that person is. You know, what that support plan looks like for that child at home might be very different than what it looks like for that person at school or for that person in a work environment. So when we're thinking about prevention strategies based on the behavior function of obtaining, whether it's obtaining attention, obtaining an object, or gaining access to some kind of sensory input, you know, throughout the day, one of the things we want to think about is providing meaningful praise when the person's engaged in appropriate behavior, even for small things. This is particularly important if the function of the behavior is to gain attention. But this is important in general, I think, because as adults, we get busy and engaged in whatever it is we're doing, and we sometimes tend to most frequently verbally engage the individual we're supporting to redirect them, or when they're not doing what they should be doing. But it's really important for us to be super intentional about providing praise and labeling what we're praising them for, so that that person starts understanding, oh, this is sitting in my chair. And every time I sit in my chair, I get praised for that. And I want that attention. So the best way to get it is to sit in my chair like the teachers asked me to do, or something like that. We need to think about being clear about our expectations. So this is where you've got to know the individual you're supporting, have a clear understanding of their language level, their communication skills, so that we know how to communicate expectations in the most effective way for them. So if you're working with somebody in a work environment, do they understand all the different tasks related to the work that they're doing, you know, or do they understand if they're engaging in that behavior to gain access to break time or lunchtime or food, you know, do they understand when they're going to get access to food throughout the day, so that that's clear for them. And then sometimes we have to modify the environment, again, depending on the individual. Sometimes we may have to remove items or make items that are contributing to that problem behavior less accessible to the person. We may have to schedule access to the desired items if the person's engaging in the behavior to gain access to particular objects or activities. And then use visual supports to clarify the expectations. And when I talk about using visual supports, again, it's important that those are individualized. If it's a person who can read, then obviously we're going to provide those visual supports in a written format, just like you or I would use, whether it's on an agenda, like you've received tons of visual, great information about this conference and knowing what to expect. But if it's a person who doesn't read or who is not fluent in reading, we need to think about how we're going to provide visual supports in order for that person to understand what the expectations are. So when it's replacement skills, so skills we're going to teach that person based on the behavior function of obtaining, we're going to think about how we're going to teach them a more socially appropriate way to request the objects or attention. This gets back to the big 4 that I mentioned at the very beginning of this. Have we given the person the skills to know how to gain access to attention, to get help from an adult in an appropriate way, to gain the attention of their peers in an appropriate way? And if we haven't done that, then how can we expect them to move beyond where they are with their problem behavior is the only way they know how to do that. And then another really important thing when we're talking about obtaining is teaching them how to wait. So many individuals we work with who have significant problem behavior, even as they get into middle school, high school, these are 2 of the key things. They don't know how to wait for a preferred thing, don't know how to accept no, you can't have access to what you want right now, or don't know how to request those things in a more socially appropriate way. So we've got to be sure we're teaching those skills in a way that works for that person where their skill level is right now. And then when we think about the adult response for obtaining, so when I say contrived support, what I mean are those supports that we're typically providing for them, those additional supports that are beyond what's available in the natural environment. So thinking about how the job coach, the teacher, the parent is teaching them how to use the new skill and then providing access to the desired item or the desired attention. So what we have to do is we have to replace the problem behavior with a functionally equivalent behavior. And then we have to reinforce the new behavior. Because if we give in to the, say they're whining to gain access, and we give into the whining a couple of times without requiring them to give us a picture card or use a word or use the sentence, they're going to go right back to whining, right? So we have to be really mindful of everybody who's supporting that person being intentional about reinforcing the new skill that we're teaching. Sometimes we may have to offer alternatives if available, like for example, if what they're wanting isn't an option right then. You know, that's not an option right now, but here are the things we can't do right now. And then we always want to be praising that appropriate behavior, praising and positively reinforcing that appropriate behavior verbally. And more than anything, we have to respond in a way that does not reward the problem behavior. And as much as possible, this is where it's really key to get everybody working with that person on board so that there's consistency across environments. And when you talk about the sustainability piece, I think what we have to be working towards is thinking about how we're reinforcing and supporting those new behaviors in a way that we're moving towards a way of reinforcing those behaviors that's sustainable in the natural environment. So for example, if the person's seeking attention and you're working on a new skill, a new, more socially appropriate way for saying, excuse me, I need help, they need to learn how to use that skill with people outside of just say their job coach, because the job coach isn't going to be there forever, right? So we have to move towards thinking about, okay, how is this going to be behavior going to be reinforced when this support is removed, if the support's able to be removed. So I need to, as the job coach, also be working with coworkers to know, hey, we're supporting John to ask for help when he needs it and recognize when he needs help. So when he does, could you really be responsive and provide the support he needs? So that's moving towards a naturalistic support, which is a more sustainable model over time. If his coworkers know, oh, when he says, hey, I need help, then they go, oh, great, how can, you know, what do you need? And they're responding to him, so he's getting what he needs versus maybe getting frustrated or upset in the work environment. Then
Renee?
Yep.
We have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions on how to provide support to students who have negative behavior that is reinforced in the home environment?
Yes. That's where you got to get the whole team on board. So, I mean, as much as possible, we have to understand, and that's one of the things that I think has been really challenging during the past 6 months, right, is so many parents, I mean, we've all been kind of in survival mode to some degree. But I think to be as effective as possible, what I always encourage doing is having conversations, having a team meeting or having a conversation with families and family members and caregivers to find out, you know, what behavior looks like in the home environment, how it may vary from what you're seeing, and how everybody can move closer to a common place and how everybody's responding. So I think communication with family and caregivers is the most effective way to address that. I think the thing that we have to always be mindful of, if you are the professional in that on that team, then I think the thing we always have to be mindful of is there's no way realistically to expect families to always respond as home environment's totally different than a work environment than a school environment. I don't think in most cases it's possible for families to be as consistent as we are able to be in a school or a work environment, just because the demands of a home situation are so different. And because families are having to caregive right now, a lot of families are caregiving 24/7, right? So we have to kind of find a way that meets in the middle. And as much as possible, be consistent. But I always just say that with the caveat that We never want to be judging and critical of what's going on at home, in the sense that sometimes families are just doing their best to get through day to day. But as much as possible, if everybody can be on the same page, and sometimes the way I address that is thinking about, okay, maybe there's 5 things that ideally, if they changed, it would look better, but having conversation about, okay, if this is what we're trying to work towards, you know, what would that look like at home, and what's feasible at home to do to help us kind of move towards this common goal. So then if the family's identifying, oh, well, you know, we could change this, or we could do this, then at least you're moving towards that common goal a little more than you were before.
Okay, we have one more, Renee. How
Okay.
long do you try to address one trigger or use an intervention before moving on to something else? Because the trigger may not always be one thing, especially when you're first trying to identify it or an intervention that may take time to bring about the desired behavior change.
Well, there absolutely can take time to bring about the desired behavior change. If you have gone through a systematic process, like if you've conducted an FBA and you have implemented a BIP, and you have provided follow-up support to assure that everybody knows how to implement the behavior intervention plan, and that it's being implemented consistently, then I mean, I would be monitoring regularly, but I would be checking back. I would give it, you know, at least 4 weeks of consistently implementing the plan. And if you're not seeing change, then trying to identify where the gaps are and where the problems are. But before you can say something's working or not working, you've got to make sure that it's being implemented consistently. Unless, I will say, and I've had situations where we've come up with a plan, and a week or 2 in, if it's not working because of various factors within the environment, then you may need to modify it before then. So you want to give it enough time to give it time to work. But if you're seeing some big things that just aren't working at all, then I mean, reevaluate. And that's why the person who's overseeing that plan needs to be consistently collaborating with the team and monitoring what's going on. But
Someone else would like to know if you're going to also discuss apathy as a part of behavior.
oh, I hadn't planned on it. Maybe that's a question we can get to. Let me get through these, and maybe then that person can ask that, where I make sure I understand what they're asking. So let me get through these, and if the person who just asked about apathy, if you don't mind asking that at the end, maybe if you don't mind asking on camera, that would help, or typing a little more detail in there for Ginger. So, so prevention strategies for the behavior if escape is the, I think I skipped this first slide. So you want to think about how you can modify the task or expectations. So sometimes what you're having to do is look at, is there a mismatch between the person's skill and the expectation I have placed for them? And I think when I think about the impact of the pandemic on this too, we have to think about endurance. I mean, endurance of the person. Again, a lot of kids have been home with fewer demands placed on them just because everybody's in survival mode. And we may need to make tasks smaller, shorter, easier initially with more frequent breaks as that person builds up their tolerance just for having demands and expectations placed on them, for being around other people. We've all talked about and joked even amongst ourselves how our social tolerance is maybe lower than it used to be because we get tired quicker because we're not used to being around people. So thinking about how you might modify the tasks or expectations, simplifying the task, offering choices, and then using visual supports or a task list. And then planning ahead, you've got to consider the environment and the potential mismatch between the environment and the person's sensory preferences. So maybe you need to make modifications to the environment in order to make it more tolerable for that person. They might need a quieter space, or, you know, just again, knowing the person, knowing their needs, and adjustments for social demands as well. So especially when we are working with individuals who maybe have social anxiety or who have autism, and using supports to help them know what's expected. And then for escape, new skills is teaching a socially appropriate way to request a break or to protest, and allowing people to protest. We all have the option to protest, right? In an appropriate way. But sometimes it's like kids with, especially with autism, there's a lot of focus on compliance and compliance training, but how are we teaching them to say no in a socially appropriate way or to request a break? Knowing and recognizing when they need help. So instead of escaping the task, maybe they are recognizing, I need help, I don't know what to do. And then sometimes we have to do a task analysis and break a skill down and recognize where the gap is for that person. Maybe they can complete certain parts of the task, but there's certain parts of it that they don't know what to do, and that's where the breakdown's happening, where they're trying to get out of the task. And then again, just looking at how we're adjusting our response, redirecting them to using the new skill if it is that we're teaching them how to request a break or how to request help, offering alternatives, you know, some of those same things that we talked about a minute ago, and then always thinking about how you're training for the natural environment. How are we teaching this person to respond to cues and to reinforcement within the natural environment? And how are we supporting those other people who are in the natural environment, whether it's peers, coworkers, gen ed teacher, whoever that might be, to know how to respond to the person appropriately. So in this situation, they figured out they had to modify the plan for this individual to help her stay engaged by teaching her a self-management system, and also teaching her how to, as we said, engage and ask for more difficult tasks.
Hey, Renee, we have about 4 minutes left.
Thank you. So there is a link in here to a really, really awesome environmental assessment if you're working to support people that was developed at the Texas Workforce. And when you go to this link, you're looking for DARS 1877 is the form number you're looking for. This is my contact information. And I was just going to show you, this is what it looks like when you go to this link. And you want to scroll down to this 1877, and it has A, B, and C. And you can just download these and use these. Has some really awesome things to help you think about when supporting people in the work environment. Okay, I am going to stop so that if you wanted to ask clarification about that apathy question and any other questions. Oh, somebody needs the link again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oops.
I do.
Again.
I didn't say that. Oh,
Here's the link, and it should be in the PowerPoint if you get the PowerPoint. So when you talk about apathy, do you just mean like lack of interest, lack of motivation?
Are you going to have to unmute them, Renee?
I don't know.
They can unmute or they can type, but at this point, we'll probably have like 1 minute.
Yeah, we have like 1 minute. So I don't see, so no desire. Okay, so she's thinking of apathy as no desire, so lack of motivation. That's where I think, that's where I always go to, how can I tap into this person's interest? Something that they like. Now, there are some individuals that don't have very many interests, and it can be really hard to get them motivated. But that's where I'm gathering information from family, from teachers. Is there anything this person likes? How can I hook them that way? And then maybe expand and build on what it is that they like. Some of the individuals I work with have very significant autism and have very narrow interests. And I just try and tap into, okay, what are the characteristics of the things they like? How can we start with, oh, he likes to jump. Can I join him in jumping? And then how can we like build on exposing them to other things that might become an area of interest for either leisure, work, that type of thing. So for some individuals, and I don't know what, you can also email me if you want, Mary. But I think sometimes for some individuals that don't have a lot of intrinsic motivation, we have to really kind of find out what those hooks are through their interest or through exposing them to other things to try and expand their, some of the kids just haven't been exposed, or individuals haven't been exposed to a lot of stuff, and it's just exposing them and then seeing from there what they like.
I think time's up, Renee. And so if that person wants to email us, we can certainly give them a little bit more information about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Renee. And everybody, don't forget, our next session that will be provided in English will be tonight at 7:00 p.m., where we highlight some post-secondary education programs that we have here in Oklahoma. Have a great day.
Thank you.